Good. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Jeffrey Beinman, and I am a member of the steering committee of Independent Jewish Voices, as is another of the speakers. And I was asked to chair this somewhat at the last minute, so any deficiencies I hope you'll put down to my lack of preparation. But the purpose of this meeting is to introduce Professor Shlomo Sand and his latest book, copies of which are here, together with his earlier book. And we intend to have a discussion about the content of the book. I don't know how many people have read it, but we'll have a good account of the thesis of the book from Professor Sand. But also we're fortunate to have Professor Donald Sassoon with us, and I'm going to ask him to make some introductory remarks, which will perhaps give us an account of the book and the background to the book, and then I'll call on Professor Sand, and then after that we'll open up the meeting to all of you for questions and perhaps some comments. So can I ask Professor Sassoon to say a few words?
Yes, this is Shlomo's second book in what I understand is a trilogy, which in English would be The Invention of. So we've had The Invention of a Jewish People, which was launched in England, at least was launched here. Was it 3 years ago? Something like that?
4 years.
4 years ago. Now, today, we're having the invention of the land of Israel, and I'm told that you better brace yourselves for the invention of the secular Jew.
Yeah.
You.
Us, yes.
Yes. I always thought I existed, but, I mean, having read the previous two books, which I must say, although I have been a secular Jew for a pretty long time, even those first two books destabilized some of my beliefs. So allow me just a very, very brief semi-autobiographical note, because one of the reviews the previous book got, I think it's the one by Simon Schama, in the Financial Times, and Simon said that there's nothing new about this. There's nothing new about the invention of the Jewish people, that everybody in Golders Green is perfectly aware of that, which came to me as a complete shock, since everybody I know in Golders Green was not at all aware of that. So that would have been a revelation. But also I happen to have gone to a Jewish school, and nearly all the myths you list in both the previous book and this book were taught, well, not even taught, were taken to be absolutely normal. And I remember, in particular, in the previous book, something about which I was not quite sure is when Shlomo says that, strictly speaking, there never was an expulsion of the Jews from the original land of Israel, etc., etc. Since I'm a skeptical historian, and since I know in France someone who is a great specialist of Roman history, I asked her, I said, I never thought about that. I took it for granted that, of course, the Jews were expelled. I mean, it doesn't mean that they have a right to go back or a state, all that. But nevertheless, I thought that as a matter of historical fact. And she said, poof, absolutely not. Jews were not, Romans never expelled anybody. They killed people, but they didn't actually bother to actually, put them on a cart, and it's much too expensive. You don't want to destroy someone, you just execute the whole lot. So, of course, the Jews were. Everybody, she says, knows that. And I said, no, everybody who is a specialist in Roman history knows that. Yes, he said, that's what I meant. I said, yes, but there are people in the wider world who are not specialists in Roman history. So that is one of the things that I was not sure about the first one. The second one finds me much more fascinated and interested, because this is very much the material of the historian of 19th and 20th century Europe, namely the definition of the state, the boundaries of a state, the nation of a state, and so on. And I know you are an admirer of Renan, because Ernest Renan, who wrote a very famous lecture back in 1882, Qu'est-ce que c'est une nation? What is a nation? Which, you know, there's a whole literature about that. And one of the things that Renan says, a celebrated aphorism, he more or less says that the people who make up the nation remember, and if they don't remember, they make it up, or, you know, forget the exact words. And this is part of creating a nation. He then also adds, much to the annoyance of historians, because history is a threat to nationalism, because one of the tasks of the historians, he wrote in 1882, which is not bad, one of the tasks of historians is precisely that of dismantling some of the mythologies of nationalism. And since this meeting apparently is in memory of Eric Hobsbawm, yes? And Eric Hobsbawm was my teacher. I did my PhD under his supervision. One of the very things he insisted, and he taught, is that the one thing historians must do is to remember what people have either made up or have forgotten. This is a central task. And I think, Shlomo, whatever people might say about this or that part of the book, I mean, this is your central job. And even though you're never trained as a historian, were you?
As a historian, yes, but not as a historian of Judaism.
No, of course, of France.
No, but France, yes.
Yes. I don't want to speak at length because I want you to tell people about your central thesis. But one thing I want to say is that from a comparative point of view, because I'm a comparative historian, I like to look at A and then look at B and X and look at Y and compare and contrast. I mean, this is a sort of thing I like doing. And reading this book, I thought Jews, Zionist, nationalist, but also, frankly, even Jews in general, like to emphasize their exceptionalism. We are special. Not because we're necessarily the chosen people, although this adds to the exceptionalism, because God can only choose one, and, you know, it had to be us. The old Jewish joke, couldn't you choose somebody else, you know? But everybody, every nation which constructs itself also preaches exceptionalism. The Germans have a Sonderweg, the Americans have American exceptionalism, l'exception française, the particularities of this, peculiarities of that. It's a sort of ongoing saga in which everyone insists that they are special. And one of the things that make them special is the unchanging nature of the past. Everybody else changes. Everybody evolves. There is history all around us, except for us, whoever we are, Italians, Hungarians, Americans, and so on. We have an essence which never changes. And the point of politics is to find what our essence is and then make it realized. And I was very amused by the discussion on the boundaries of the land of Israel, because, as you point out, strictly speaking, the actual, you know, a unified state of Israel actually, if it existed for about a century. Otherwise, there is no particular story. And since I've done that kind of exercise for other European countries, it's very, very rare to have a state with national boundaries, with the same national boundaries stretching back for a very long time. I mean, they keep on changing. And every time they change, somehow the nation does not change. Had it not been, for example, for a little pact between the state of Piedmont and the French state, Nice would have been Italian, and instead of the bouillabaisse, they would have had zuppa di pesce, and they would have been patriotic Italian, just like the people who are a little bit on the other side of the border and are actually technically Italian feel like that. And one can multiply this. So in terms of demystifying the mythos, as you say, I think you've done an excellent job. I'm not sure your popularity in Israel, particularly in the establishment, will increase very much. That's obviously not something you want to. And my final point, because I want to listen to what you have to say, is to insist on the unpopularity of Zionism among Jews. You insist that the story that for 2,000 years we all wanted to go back, you dismiss it. It's just not true. That Jerusalem was a sort of, next year in Jerusalem, okay, it's part of a prayer, but that's about it. We have no next year in Jerusalem. And even both liberal rabbis and Orthodox rabbis in the 19th century were anti-Zionist. In fact, the vast majority of Jews were anti-Zionist. And whether this would not confirm the increasingly held view that the real determinant of the construction of the present state of Israel and Zionism has been anti-Semitism. Had it not been for anti-Semitism, both in terms of the anti-Semitism, say, of Russia and the pogroms, the anti-Semitism, of course, during the but before Herzl himself, after all, was a secular Jew and so on, and then decisive, obviously, the Second World War, which makes it. And in a way, we are looking at the failures of Zionism, in the sense that even though everybody now could go to Israel, even though there is finally a Jewish state, even though finally there is Jerusalem there, 10 million out of the 15 million Jews in the world have absolutely not the slightest intention to go there. They want to stay in America, they want to stay in Britain, in France, and so on and so forth. And finally, one last remark from my own background. I'm not, like many people here, an Ashkenazi Jew. I'm a Sephardi Jew. I was born in Egypt, and my family is Middle Eastern Jewish. My family left Egypt shortly after my birth, that is in 1947, for reasons which have nothing to do with politics But after 1956, most of the Jews who lived in Egypt left. They left because, of course, of the Suez Crisis. It had become increasingly uncomfortable. Some of them had been there for generations. They left. And we were then in Italy, and there was a constant stream of refugees going through Milan. And you know where they wanted to go? The rich ones went straight to Switzerland. The poor ones went to Argentina. Those who had relatives in the United States went to the United States, and an awful lot of them went to France. Very, very few went to Israel. So, from a point of view of the sort of program is, if something happens to you, then going to Israel is a sort of automatic reflex. It did not work. As long as I could go somewhere, they did. Russian Jews who could not go to the United States went to Israel. Moroccan Jews who could not go anywhere else went to Israel.
The poor one.
The poor ones. So that in a sense, Israel, one would redefine Zionism. This is the land for poor Jews and American Jewish religious people who have,
Yeah.
Okay.
On that controversial note, can we now go on to Professor Sand? And I'd just like to say this, that this is really meant to be the launch of his latest book on the invention of the land of Israel, but his earlier book is so integrated with it that I think people would appreciate it if you could say a few words about the earlier book before you come on to the
very shortly
theme of the latest book. Yes.
Very shortly.
Yes.
It's two parts of the same story in some way, and I wrote the first book because I got the full professorship in Tel Aviv. And I stopped to be afraid to write and to think openly about a lot of questions that bothered me for a long time before. Then when I got the full professorship, I decided to write the first one.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Jeffrey Beinman, and I am a member of the steering committee of Independent Jewish Voices, as is another of the speakers. And I was asked to chair this somewhat at the last minute, so any deficiencies I hope you'll put in discussion about the content of the book. I don't know how many people have read it, but we'll have a good account of the thesis of the book from Professor Sand. But also we're fortunate to have Professor Donald Sassoon with us, and I'm going to ask him to make some introductory remarks, which will perhaps give us an account of the book and the background to the book, and then I'll call on Professor Sand, and then after that we'll open up the meeting to all of you for questions and perhaps some comments. So can I ask Professor Sassoon to say a few words?
Yes, this is Shlomo's second book in what I understand is a trilogy, which in English would be The Invention of. So we've had the invention of a Jewish people.
Down to my lack of preparation. But the purpose of this meeting is to introduce Professor Shlomo Sand and his latest book, copies of which are here, together with his earlier book. And we intend to have a